Hi there, this is Phil Simborg again from the Backgammon Learning Center with another interview, a video podcast. And this is a gentleman that I have been trying to get to interview for the last 10, 12 years. And if you go through the archives, you'll see that I've interviewed most of the top giants in the world, but this guy has been really evasive. So I'll let him introduce himself. Here is Paul Weaver. Well, that's quite a welcome, Paul. Just as a brief introduction, Paul Weaver, the professional piano player, is really a professional backgammon player. For those of you who may not know, the Giants of Backgammon voting started in 1993, and Paul was on that first one almost every year in the top 20 most of the time. He's currently ranked number 17. He's the only player in the world that has won tournaments on 5 continents, and I'm going to want to find out what happened to the other 2 continents, Africa and
Antarctica.
Antarctica was where you failed to succeed. Otherwise, you've been a champion, a backgammon champion on 5 continents. And you also, when you travel, I know you give lectures all over the world and you teach. And as a teacher myself, I'm very interested in your teaching philosophy and your lectures and your approach to that. So would you care to tell us a little bit about that right now?
Certainly, Phil, and I want to thank you very much for all that you do for backgammon. You do an immense amount for backgammon. You teach, you help out a lot of people, you contribute in ways that I don't know. And you've done some 30 of these interviews. You have a really fantastic website, and you send out a lot of interesting positions. So, Phil, I just want to thank you very much for all that you do for backgammon.
Very kind. Thank you.
I don't mind if I make one correction. You said I'm a professional backgammon player. Well, maybe at one point I attempted to be, but now I'm retired or semi-retired or whatever. So, so you were asking me about my philosophy of teaching backgammon. Okay, that interruption. My mother just interrupted me to say. Okay, so okay, my philosophy of teaching backgammon is that the most important aspect of backgammon is checker play. And it certainly makes logical sense to learn the game from the very beginning. The very first thing you want to teach any student in any lesson is how to play the opening rolls. But it's not just it's not that simple, because what you need to do is to learn how to play all of the opening rolls for the 4 main match scores, and I'm talking about for money, which is actually not a match score, and for double match point and gammon go and gammon save. And so if you're going to be playing matches, and that's the basic form of backgammon now. Decades ago, very few matches were played. Almost all the backgammon was money games, heads up or chouette. But now there is very little money action, and almost all the action is matches. And so if you're going to play matches, you need to know how to play the opening rolls, and you need to know how to play them for all the scores. And Phil, do you mind if I try to trip you up? I'm going to give you a really sneaky, tricky opening roll, and I'm going to try to trip you up, okay?
You got it.
So here's the deal. How do you play opening 3-2? Let's assume that you are 2 away and your opponent is 4 away. And this is a trick question. I'm asking you, how do you play opening 2-3 at that score?
Okay, if I'm 2 away, I want to make an advanced anchor and not get gammon, so I'm definitely splitting. The normal play is to come up with the 3 and come down with the 2. I guess at this score I would probably come up with both checkers so that I'm much more likely to make an advanced anchor.
Okay, well, actually, I give Dimitri for discovering this 6 years ago in 2010, that the correct play with opening 3-2 at the 2-away, 4-away score is to split with the deuce and come down with the 3. And this is
Wow.
not the best play for money. But
Wow.
this is the play that Francois Tardieu tried. So you have a comment about this? Does this surprise you that splitting with the deuce is right with this score?
Well, I know splitting something is right because you want to get to an advanced anchor. And now that you mentioned that play, I see that it duplicates threes because the 6-3 hits and the 3 hits inside. That's the only logic that I could come up with right away.
The reason is that you give your opponent much more inefficient cubes. And what's going on here is that after your opening 2-3, your opponent is not yet good enough to double, but he has many big time huge market losers if you split with the deuce. His market losers are bigger. He loses his market by a bigger amount, so he has inefficient cubes. And if he rolls double 5s and you fan, for example, if he rolls double 3s, there are just many sequences where he loses his market by an enormous margin if you split with the deuce. And so it's a matter of cube efficiency. It's really tiny. It's not really interesting as a practical matter. It's really interesting only as a theoretical matter. And just, Phil, I have to admit, forgive me, but I get a tiny amount of satisfaction for tripping you up with this and just sort of showing off that even a great teacher like you, Phil, you need to learn how to play the opening roll. Okay.
You're right.
And learning how to play the opening roll is difficult when you try to learn how to play the opening roll for all scores, like in a 9-point match. And then the next thing you need to do, if you want to teach a student or if you want to learn the game yourself, you need to learn how to play the second roll. And of course, first of all, you need to learn how to play it in money situations, and then you need to learn how to play it at various match situations. And fortunately, anybody who has XG, all of this data, all of this information about how to play the first and second rolls for many match scores, it's available in the book. When you ask for an evaluation in XG on a first or second roll, what you get is a little icon of a little book, and what it has is all the data that's already been rolled out. It doesn't actually do an evaluation. It just has all the first and second rollout data stored in there. And so anybody, I mean, like 10 years ago, 20, 30 years ago, nobody had any idea what the correct plays were for all of the opening rolls and the responses. But now all this information is publicly available immediately for anybody who has XG. And so there's really very little excuse for not knowing it. But at the same time, there's almost nobody who knows this stuff.
That's right. By the way, it's also available. Mochi has a new program that shows it. On Stick's website, he has the first and second rolls. And I developed with Perry and Murata Khan a program called Opening Ceremony, where everything's been rolled out 5,000 times for the first and second rolls at all 4 scores. And even after studying all that, I don't get them all right myself. So you're absolutely right. The information's there, but it's very hard to know them all that well.
Okay, Phil, I'm going to tell you there are 2 players in the top 5 that are very weak on the openings, and I'm not going to mention their names. I don't want to embarrass anybody, but these 2 guys are natural players. They are exceptionally talented, far above me. I don't consider myself to be a talented player, but if these 2 guys would just learn the first, the opening and the second and the third rolls, their PRs would drop way down. They would be much greater players.
And at the same time, there's people like you and Knack and David Rockwell and others, and probably Dimitri that know them by heart. And by the way, you're all great players too, but you've taken the time to learn it, and they haven't.
Okay, so Phil, if I can give my basic philosophy of teaching somebody how to play, with regard to checker play, I emphasize the first roll and the second roll. And you take anybody who's been playing backgammon for a long time. If you just teach them how to play the first, second, and third rolls of the game, the concepts that you learn, when to split, when to slot, when to hit on the ace point, etc. These same concepts carry over into the 4th, 5th, and 6th rolls of the game. And so it's just so essential to learn the first few rolls of the game. And the same thing with the cube. When you want to learn cube action, what you do is you start with the earliest possible cubes, which occur after 3 rolls of the game. And David Presser and his friend Igor Everenko very recently, over the past few months, earlier this year, they did like a couple of articles. talking about fourth row cube decisions. And if anybody wants to learn how to deal with the doubling cube, this is the place to start, the earliest possible. You should.
By the way, those articles are on Gammon Village for anybody who's interested in knowing where to find them.
They're on Gammon Village. Well, they're also on Primetime Magazine. And Phil, I just want to talk for a minute about Primetime Magazine. And I want to say that we are so fortunate to have Karen Davis to be our editor-in-chief. I'm not sure what her exact title is. And she has a fantastic staff of more than half a dozen people, and they do a superb job. And Primetime Magazine is really a jewel. It's something that the USBGF can be very, very proud of. And I'm not going to mention the names of the other people on the staff because I'm afraid I would leave out somebody. But they all do a great job.
I'm looking right now for my most recent copy. I make sure I buy the hard copy of every one because I think they're so great. I couldn't agree with you more. And that's one of the most wonderful things the USBGF does. And for those of you who are not very actively involved in backgammon, go to www.usbgf.org and join the organization, not just for the magazine, but to support the growth of the game. And there's a lot more things, discounts and other reasons to join. So you and I are both big believers in that organization and all they've done.
Well, Phil, let me tell you. You remember this song, a rock and roll song, "I Want to Be on the Cover of the Rolling Stone"?
Yeah.
Well, it's my goal in life. I was on the cover of Primetime, but I haven't done anything yet to earn that. I don't want to be on it until I earn it, okay?
You've done plenty to earn it, but that leads me to another question. You haven't been playing a lot lately. You said you're retired. You were a professional backgammon player for a while. Why did you retire? Why aren't you traveling more and playing more? Are you just getting tired or taking up other hobbies or what's going on?
Well, I'm in my old age now, and I'm going to be 65 in a few weeks.
I'm really sick to hear that because I'm 72 and I'm going like gangbusters. So don't give me that baloney.
Well, Phil, I guess I'm a bit of a slacker. Yeah, I'm just sort of retired and enjoying myself. I'm at home in Alabama, and you want to know the reason I'm in Alabama? Well, my family's here. And I live with my mother, and she's 89, and she doesn't drive, and so I help out my mother.
Good for you. And the reason I'm sitting here in Chicago at 0 degrees is because my family's here too. So I can't think of a better reason to live somewhere.
And I do a lot of things besides play backgammon. I have a lot of interest. Like
what? Besides the piano, what else?
And I make rocking chairs for.
You make rocking chairs?
Well, actually, I do not construct the furniture, but what I do is I buy old rocking chairs at antique shops, and I fix them up, and I paint them. And you want to see some of them, Phil?
Yeah. What do you do after you paint? Do you sell them or give them to people or what?
Mainly, I give them away. Okay, I don't sell them because nobody's interested in paying me what I think they're worth. If I was going to sell these things, I would want $200 or more for each one. Nobody's going to pay that. And so, okay, here you see a rocking chair.
Oh yeah.
This is one of my favorites. I believe this thing is over 100 years old. It's made by Gustav Stickley in 1901, and I have it painted real bright rainbow colors for kiddies. And let me show you some of my other chairs. Oh, this one's going to have a big rainbow on it. Okay, here's a chair I made for my sister's grandson. Okay, his name is Brian, and I want to show you, I put the rainbow on the seat.
Oh, yeah.
And
that's beautiful.
When I first started making the rainbows, they had only 6 stripes, and I've gone up to 12 stripes on my rainbow now. I'm going to ask you another trick question, Phil, and I want to warn you, I'm trying to trip you up. Question is, how many colors are there in the rainbow?
Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
No, the answer is the number of rainbows, the number of colors in a rainbow is infinite because it's a continuous spectrum. And you see here in this chair, I have a 12-stripe rainbow. The rainbow begins and ends in the clouds. And around the cloud, I have a silver lining, literally.
I love it. I love it.
So I'll show you my
So this is another one of your ways of bringing some color and joy to the world. I think that's great.
Okay, here is a pink, purple, silver.
Oh, that's my favorite.
For a little girl, you know, little girls like pink, purple, and silver.
Uh-huh.
And so I put a rainbow on the seat, and the rainbow is all shades of pink and purple.
That's my favorite. I think that's beautiful.
On the headboard, this is khaki. And on the back of the headboard, we have We Love Khaki. I don't know if you can see it.
No, it doesn't come out real good. I can see it, yes.
Okay, let me show you one more chair, and then we'll, and then that's enough of the chairs. Okay, this is like Caribbean colors. These are like coral and turquoise, and if you go down to the Caribbean countries, you'll see a lot of buildings with these colors.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me, it instantly reminds me of the Bahamas or Jamaica. Absolutely.
Okay, Phil.
That's cool.
What's next here?
Okay, so I'm interested, the fact that you play the piano, I have seen so often there's a direct correlation between math skills and music. Because music is all about math. It's all about timing, and you can boil down music to numbers. And I know you have excellent math skills. So tell me a little bit about your education. Where did you grow up, and what is your schooling? What did you major in, and how did you get into backgammon instead of becoming a professor somewhere?
Well, I majored in math, and I was always talented in math. I went to college, undergraduate at Vanderbilt in Nashville, and I got a master's in math at Purdue University, and then I had a job in Boston as a computer programmer in 1976, and I used to be an avid table tennis player. I was not talented, I was never a good player, but I played in a lot of tournaments and I enjoyed playing. And when I got to Boston, I played in the club in 1976, and I got very frustrated because nobody wanted to play ping pong anymore. They were sitting around the club and they were playing some silly board game with dice and moving checkers around the board, and I had never seen it before, but I knew it was the wrong side of the checkerboard. And I had never seen the game played before. And so that was my introduction to backgammon in 1976, but I really only played a couple of times. And then 2 years later in 78, I had a girlfriend, believe it or not, and she pulled down a plastic and cardboard set from the closet, and she said, "You ever play this game?" And I said, "Yeah." Her name was Nancy, and she was very competitive. She was on her college tennis team. She was also real smart. She was a college double major in college in math and physics. And so, yeah, she became a good player, but she didn't have the temperament for the game. And so that's how I got started. I took lessons from Roberti, and then McGrill was living in Boston in 1980 or 81. And I took a few lessons from McGrill. And I recall McGrill telling me during one of the lessons in 1980 or 81, he said, "Never within our lifetime will we see a computer that plays backgammon as well as a human." And by 1994, Jellyfish was released, and just within 14 years of Paul making that statement, the computers came along, and so that totally changed the game. And I played backgammon back in the time when the game was not solved by computer.
Well, that brings up
a totally different world back then, because we had no way of knowing what the right play was. It was people would argue endlessly, and people would play propositions, and everybody had an opinion, but nobody knew for sure.
Well, that brings up an interesting point. We all agree now that we have incredibly good computers, Extreme Gammon being clearly the best by all kinds of proof, and probably better than any human being, although in certain kinds of back games and so on, I would probably bet on you over the computer. But for overall, we know the computer is pretty good. And it has, as you said, changed the game quite a bit. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of debate about this. I'd like to get your take on this. There's a lot of people that resent that we now have the computer, that all the top players are playing pretty much the same. People are resenting this new BMAB organization where they're registering all these matches and looking at exactly how everybody's playing. So that's requiring people, in order to get a good rating, to play more like the computer. Is this good for the game or bad for the game? What are your thoughts?
Well, Well, we're not going to be able to stop it, whether it's good or bad. We're not going to be able to stand in the way of progress. And I certainly understand the point of view of some money players. I know of one very strong, serious money player, and he made the statement that that he would have given away $100,000 if it could have prevented the masses from having jellyfish and snowy and XG. And he was serious because during the, I've been playing backgammon now for almost 40 years, I guess 38 years or 40 years since I played my first game. And the landscape has totally changed, because 40 years ago, nobody knew what was going on. Nobody knew who really who all the good players were, and the bad players really didn't have a conception of how bad they were. Maybe they thought they were not quite as good as the good players, but they really had no idea. And so the game was totally different back then, because there was an awful lot of gambling and an awful lot of weak players, and the difference between the good players and the bad players back then was just so huge.
Well, let me just add to that my own experience. I've been playing backgammon chouette for about 40 years in Chicago, and we used to have at least 10, 12 fish show up, guys who didn't have a clue, who kept losing and thought they were unlucky. That doesn't happen anymore, exactly for the reasons you're saying. They now know they're worse players, so that hustling part of the game and that part of the game is gone.
Okay, well, you asked me if it's a good thing or a bad thing. Okay,
Right.
Well, to tell you the truth, Phil, I have mixed emotions about it, because it's bad in a way, because maybe I'm not able to make as much money as I would be able to do otherwise. But there's no way we can stop the progress. But it's good in a way, because to me it is very interesting from an intellectual point of view to see the game of backgammon solved, and just to wonder, you know, for many years, for example, everybody poo-pooed the idea that making the 2-point with opening 6-4 would be a reasonable play, and now it turns out to be very close for money, and it turns out to be the best play if you're behind in the match. And nobody had any idea of this, and so it's just very interesting.
Well, Jim Pasco had that idea, but except for him, I think you're right.
So yeah, there's the good and the bad, and we're not going to be able to stand in the way of progress.
What do you think about the BMAB organization and tracking everybody? Right now, Victor Ashkenazi is just like 1/10 of a point ahead of Mochi as #1, and then comes Michi, and so on. Is that a good thing to get players who are consciously during matches playing simply to try and get the best PR, as opposed to just trying to beat their opponent?
Well, I think it's really fantastic for backgammon. I think it really revolutionized backgammon, and I actually think it's the story of the year. Rick Janowski has done a really fantastic job with BMAB. It's a really hard thing for him to do, and he has put a lot of his own money into it. And he could use donations from other people, but what he has done is he's made an effort to get matches that have been streamed, and what he does is he makes sure that they are transcribed correctly, and then he Ianchos them. And what I mean when I say he does the Ianchoing is that he puts them into he enters into the XG program manager, whatever you call it, and XG takes care of everybody's keeping track with everybody's PRs. So he has a PR rating list based on tournament performance, and he does a really good job. And one thing you have to do is there are many people who record their own matches, and you have to be very careful, because most people they will turn in the good and the bad, but there might be some people who might only turn in their good matches and not turn in their bad ones. And if you allow this to happen, then it totally destroys the integrity of the process. So you have to make sure that that if a guy plays matches, and if he submits them, that he declares before the start of the match that it's going to count in the ratings. But I think this is really good for backgammon, because like Rick has run quite a few of these BMAB tournaments over in England, and I wondered, I said, well, the people who have a PR of 8 or 10, are they embarrassed for people to know. And Rick says, no, this gives them a goal. This gives them something to shoot at. For the first time, these people are able to see what their PR is in live matches. And then they can see themselves improving, and they love it. And maybe some people are embarrassed, but if you're going to play backgammon, people are going to know how well you play anyway. So I think it is really, really great for backgammon, because now for the very first time in the history of the game, thanks to Rick Janowski, we have a really reliable and accurate rating system. I think it's fantastic. Rick does a great job, and I would love to see the USBGF provide financial support, and also the British Backgammon Association, whatever it's called. I would love to see them provide some financial support for Rick, because what he is doing is really, really great for the game.
Paul, you and I are on the same page. I personally help sponsor 2 BMAB events in the States. Dimitri does a lot of great work here. David Presser helps out. Linda Rockwell. There's a lot of people supporting it. I think it's also very good. But I think it's nice to combine it with the Giants, because the Giant list also gives us a reading of who you're afraid to play and what the players think of. And I want to go back to that list for just a minute, because you've been a highly ranked player on the Giants list, and you continue to be, even though you're retired. But this last Giants list has caused a kind of an uproar, because a lot of very, very good players like Ed O'Loughlin didn't make the list, and a lot of players that nobody ever heard of did make the list. I want to know your thoughts about that.
Well, the Giants list has really gone through a big evolution in the 24 years or however long it's been around. And in the beginning, it was brand new, but it had instant credibility, because people looked at the results, and like everybody on the list was a good player. And always there are going to be people who are left out, and always personalities and popularity. It's got something to do with it. But the long and the short of it is that when they came out with the Giants list in February of this year, that I'm just going to give my opinion, okay? I don't know for sure. I don't know for sure what happened. And I just want to admit up front that I'm giving my opinion. But it's my opinion that there were a few people on the list who are not among the top 200 or 300 players. And how do I know this? Well, I admit I don't know for sure. But let me just back up and say that about 2 or 3 years ago, Mochi told me that, I asked Mochi, how many players are there in the world who play with a PR of under 4? This was like about 3 years ago. He said there are at least 40. And so if 3 years ago there were 40, obviously there are going to be a lot more now. And so maybe there are 60 or 70, who knows? And how many people play under 5? I mean, it's my opinion that there are easily 200 or 300 people who play under 5. And it's my opinion that we have a few people on the Giants list now who may play quite a bit worse than 5. And so if it's your intention to compile a list of the top 32 players, and if you end up with a product where a few people on the list are not even in the top 300, then you got to know and understand that your methodology was wrong, and you screwed up, and something is wrong. And consequently, the Giants list has diminished in respect. And I just want to give you one example. Petco. Everybody knows Petco, and everybody respects him and loves him. He's a great player, and he's a really great guy. And as far as I know, in Petco's entire life, he's only made one post on Stick's site. And the one and only time he ever made a post on Stick's site was sometime after the Giants list came out. And what he said, he said, maybe we really don't need the Giants list anymore, because we have all the computer rating things. And so if a player like Petco comes out and says, maybe we don't need it anymore, then that's a sign that the Giants list has diminished in credibility. And I think this year, 2016, marks a turning point, because I think the BMAB has more respect and credibility as a rating list than the Giants list. Now, the Giants list is still going to be around for a long time. And I want to say that this year, the Giants list did a really good job of picking out the top 10 or 12 players. But yeah, I just have no complaint with that. And so
it's hard to argue with Mochi, Michi, and Akiko being at the top, and Falafel and Matt Kongeyer and the people they chose. Absolutely.
Yeah. So we want to thank the Giants committee for what they've done. But, you know, if I could just have one suggestion for the Giants list is that they should make all the ballots public. You know, in football, in college football, we have polls, and they have polls. And the polls are very good, and the polls are very accurate. But one thing about the polls is that everybody's vote is publicized. If you vote, they know. And I would love to see this for the Giants list, that everybody's vote is put up on a website, and I can see all 32 people that you voted for, and everybody can see everybody that I voted for. And I think this would go a long way toward helping the integrity.
There's been a lot of suggestions to improve the Giants list, and I think they're conscious of the fact that what they have now is broken for the first time, because there was just a lot of people put on the list that don't belong there. And people, again, I'll name Ed Loughlin as being left off. And you and I have both talked about this. Ed's one of the big stories of last year. He had an incredible year, not just by winning the ABT, but what he did in the Masters, what he did in side events. He was unbelievable. We've all talked about that. But that brings me to another subject. Are there any other big stories of this last year that you think a lot of people have been talking about? The rule changes, for example. We're going a lot more to clocks. The idea of the USBGF came out with a separate new set of rules. What are your thoughts about these rule changes and about clocks?
Well, I love clocks.
Good,
okay?
me too.
And
me too.
I would be very happy if every single match I played were played with a clock. And a lot of problems are solved, and a lot of BS is eliminated if clocks are used. And we all want tournaments to end on a reasonable schedule.
And clocks, by the way, with clocks means you're using single dice, which solves the fast rolling problem and the problem of what was the roll prior to the guy making his move. So the combination of the two, I think, are great. I'm with you on that. Good. There's another subject I wanted to mention real briefly. You said that it's just too hard to make a living anymore. I want to tell the fans or the watchers here a quick story. About 2 years ago, I think it was, you came into Chicago for the tournament. And after the tournament, I had a few people over to my house for a little chouette. It was you and me and Akiko and Carter and Tuvia. And I think we played 16 hours straight. And I'm not going to say how much you won, but you just slaughtered us all. And we're not all bad players. We're all pretty Kiko, of course, is number 3 in the world on the Giants list. I'm not that bad. Carter and I and Tuvia played a lot of chouette. You just creamed us. I think you're very wrong. I think
the money's not important. The important thing is just the fellowship, just having fun, just being around with the guys and having some good food and some good times. And money's just a way of keeping score. And so, Phil, I just had a great time. You have a beautiful apartment, by the way. And if you recall, we went up on the roof and saw the sunset from your apartment complex.
Yeah, I'm right off the lake in Chicago. You're right. Yeah.
So Phil, it was just so important to have the invitation and the good time. And
well, you're a pleasure to play with. I have a major pet peeve in backgammon, and that's people who constantly bitch about their luck and their bad rolls and are not good sports. Or when they win, they tell you that they deserve to win, and when they lose, they tell you they deserve to win. I've never seen you do any of that. You're a gentleman, and loved having you over. You've got a standing invitation. I want to move along, though.
Okay, I'll be there tomorrow.
Questions. Pardon me?
Did you hear me, Phil? You said I have a standing invitation?
Yes.
I'll be there tomorrow. 8
Okay. Tomorrow's great. And by the way, you can help me teach. I'm on the computer 4 to 5 hours a day teaching these days. Very, very busy with that. And I'm making a living not as a player, because those who can play and those who can't teach. So that's how I'm making a living in my retirement. But you mentioned you took lessons from Roberti and McGrill. I have also a very impressive list of teachers, including Kit and Perry and Joe Sylvester. And of course, I've read everything that McGrill and Roberti wrote. And of course, I worked very closely with Howard Ring and Walter Troyce and others along the way. And by the way, that brings up another subject. Walter Troyce was somewhat of a friend of yours, wasn't he?
Yes, I had the privilege of knowing Walter, and I visited him in his home on a few occasions, and he visited me in my home. I was living in Maryland at the time on one occasion, and Walter was a really great guy, and he was brilliant. And he had many, many, many talents. He was fluent in German. He played the piano very well. He was in great physical condition. He could go off and climb any of the tall mountains in New Hampshire. I went mountain climbing with him.
He's known as a great mathematician as well.
And he was just such a kind guy. Yeah, I learned so much from him.
Well, when Walter passed away, I started the Walter Troyes Memorial Fund, and we raised over $40,000 for his nieces and nephews. I'm very proud to be a part of that. So you can see by my deeds that I agree with you. Walter was one of my real all-time heroes of the game. It's interesting that you mentioned that he also is a mathematician and a piano player. But I want to mention one other thing, too, real quick, and we'll come back to Walter. You mentioned ping pong. Obviously, probably the best ping pong playing backgammon player is probably Gus Hansen, who plays in a quad game where he plays ping pong, badminton, tennis, and squash. And I think he ranked number 4 in the world in that combination. But there's a lot of other backgammon players that are big into ping pong. Bob Glass was a championship player. Steve Hast is an amazing player. I'm pretty good. In Cyprus this past trip, Bob Wachtel and I battled it out. And, you know, Bob's a great tennis player. We played a very, very close matches. And there's just a lot of people in backgammon that love ping pong as well. Mike Svabodny, the big guy, is supposed to be a great ping pong player.
There are two guys you haven't mentioned who may be the best. Mike Sienkiewicz
yes.
was a really serious tournament player about 30 years ago. And I don't know if you ever knew Brian, the Canadian left-handed guy. Do you know who I'm talking about? Brian the Whiz, the best there is. Brian Zimbick.
Oh, Zimbick.
Brian Zimbick. He grew up in Canada, and he was on the Canadian national team. When he was 18 years old, he went over to Sweden to live and train for a year. And Brian Zimbick, I would say, was a better table tennis player. I
wonder if Brian can still play well with his new figure. He's the one that got paid $100,000 from Mike Sienkiewicz to have breast implants, and he still has it to this day.
Well, that's just so nice that you mentioned it. Yes, it's a true story. One time, Mike Svabodny, he just made an off-the-cuff comment. He said, you know, Mike was always asking you, how much money could I pay you to cut your finger off? Just like that. And Mike was saying, you know, I would pay anybody $100,000 to get breast implants, and he never dreamed that anybody would actually do it. But Brian went out and got breast implants, and he showed them, and he got paid. And
yeah.
when I saw Brian, I used to sneak up from behind him and fill him out, you know? You think that's sexual harassment?
Here's what shocked me about that. He was supposed to keep them in for a year to get paid, and he's kept them in for what now, 30 years?
I don't know the story, yeah.
And I heard that he's a very interesting thing. A plastic surgeon actually turned him down for getting a lift recently. Let me look at my list right here to see if there's anything else I really haven't covered. Oh, yeah, you did write a great book, and I highly recommend your book that you wrote with Knack Ballard. And you always alluded to the fact that there might be a book B. That was book A. Is that going to ever happen, or are you letting?
No, listen, there's no money in it, okay? So we printed up 1,000 copies, and we still have maybe about 150 that are unsold. And there's just absolutely no money. It takes too much time. And what's the point of it? Okay, so
well, I hear you. Well, it was a great book. It really went in depth into the early game, and I learned much from it. And I went to your lecture in Charlotte, North Carolina. I believe it was like 8 years ago or 9 years ago, right before the book came out, and you talked about some of the things that were in the book, and it changed my opening moves and opening plays, and I won that tournament that week, and I must have used several of your plays just from the lecture that day. So I've always credited, I don't win very many ABT tournaments, so I always credited Paul Weaver for that victory. Let's get back to one other thing that we didn't talk about. Let's see, I've got a list here of, I'm really interested, aside from backgammon, what else in life, do you have any general approach or philosophy about life? Is there a way that you live your life? Is there either a religious or spiritual guide or something that really you focus on in your life?
I'm sorry, Phil. I'm just going to have to pass on that. That would be too complicated. I couldn't give a good answer.
Okay.
Maybe if you interview me again, I'll come
All
up
right.
with a prepared answer.
Tell me about this picture that we're looking at right now. This appears to be something unusual in Europe or someplace. What is this?
Okay, let me explain what's going on here. Okay, there's an anonymous guy in Britain, and they think he came from the town of Bristol. And what he does is he goes around at night and he paints he paints buildings. Like you see this scene on the building. Okay, you see where I'm standing, and then above me to my left, this is a scene on a wall that this famous guy Banksy has painted. And so what I'm holding up in my hand, I'm holding up a photograph that I bought at a store of this scene, and I'm standing in front of the scene that's in the photograph. Do you get it, Phil?
Where is it?
This is in Bristol, England.
In Bristol, England. I see.
This guy Banksy, Banksey. If you've never heard of him, you should Google him, because it's a very big mystery in Banksy in Britain, and it's been going on for a couple of decades now. Who is this guy? And,
this type of painting on walls is called
automatically valuable property.
Yeah, it's called Cirque d'Oil or something like that. It's got some kind of a funny name.
I don't know what it's called, but you know, there's a fine line between graffiti and famous art, and he is sort of on both sides of it.
Well, when it's pretty like this, I think it's great. Paul, you mentioned again, let's go back to Walter Trice, that you heard him play the piano. You told me a story about that. You want to share that with us?
Okay. I first met Walter in 1990. And I visited him in his home in Holden, Massachusetts. And Walter played the piano for me. And he played a piece by William Balcom, and it's called Graceful Ghost Rag. And Walter plays the piano much better than I ever did. And so I heard him play it, and I enjoyed the music very much. I liked it, and I wanted to learn to play it. So I asked Walter to give me the music. And he did. He gave me a photocopy of his music. And then when I got home, I made a few attempts to read it and to play it, and I gave up very quickly. And I just said, you know, this is too difficult. And then Walter died just a few years ago. So I still had the music from more than 20 years ago. And I dug the music out. And just in memory of Walter, thinking of Walter, I made a serious attempt to learn the piece, and I can play it now.
Please do. I'd love to hear it.
I think of Walter.
I can't think of a better way to close. I can't think of a better way to close the interview. Go ahead and play it for us.
Okay, it's going to take me a minute to walk into the other room and the other side of the house where the.
All right. While you're walking, let me ask you one more question. Am I going to see you at any tournaments this next year?
I am planning on playing in April. There's going to be a big event in
Washington, D.C. Yeah. Yeah, I'll be there. Mochi and I are doing a boot camp there.
Entry fee.
Great.
And I am planning on playing. They are limiting it to 16 people.
Well, good luck. We'll see. We'll see you there.
For you, the Graceful Ghost Rag. I'm not going to play the entire piece. I'm just going to play the first section. And maybe if you give me do another interview with me at some point in the future, maybe I'll play a little bit more of this. But
I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, Phil, this is our close, and so I want to thank you very much for the interview. And
my pleasure.
See you.
Thank you, Paul. I'll see you in April, and we'll talk before then. Thanks you so much.
Thank you, Phil. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.